Baltimore, Maryland, designated by former Mayor Kurt Schmoke as the city that reads, just as easily could adopt the tagline, the city that writes. From Frederick Douglass and Edgar Allan Poe to John Dos Passos and Gertrude Stein, among the most consequential figures in American literature found their way to and through Baltimore, leaving an enduring legacy. Home today to established authors, aspiring writers, and a community that celebrates the written word, Baltimore, Maryland lends itself to a memorable lit trip. I am Tim Castano, and this is Lit Trip, where we take you on a tour through a location's literary past, present, and future. Writers, scholars, civic leaders, and fans guide us through the history, influences, traditions, and contributions that transform a place into a destination. If you enjoy stories, personalities, and escape, come lose yourself in a lit trip. Baltimore sits at the divide between the North and the South, a cultural as much as geographic demarcation. The location infuses a transitory element into the city, and this transience has invited a diversity of voices heard throughout its history. Author Madison Smartt Bell, who has lived in Baltimore since the mid-1980s, offers his perspective. So, in your book Charmed City, you note how you were raised in Tennessee, educated in New Jersey, and worked in New York. You write, I came away from those experiences with an unconscious wish to live somewhere neither north nor south. Baltimore is a little of both. We're north of the Confederacy here, but south of the Mason-Dixon line. So, what is it about Baltimore's location that has attracted writers with different backgrounds and contexts?
I think for my case, it was the neither north nor south thing was appealing. And I don't think I was wholly conscious of that, but it felt kind of good here. I mean, this is a city with some southern qualities and some not so southern qualities. And that was very comfortable for me after growing up in rural Tennessee on a working farm and then spending a chunk of my 20s in New York City. This was a way of sort of averaging it out in Baltimore.
Among the most influential authors in American history have spent time in Baltimore. How have they shaped the city's literary character?
I think you have first Poe, then F. Scott Fitzgerald, who was here for a very significant period in his life, and in his writing career. And then Ann Tyler, okay? So you can draw, I mean, so those people exist sequentially as writers in Baltimore, but drawing a line between them is kind of challenging. I think a lot of the literary culture here and anywhere grows up around the schools, around, certainly for the whole duration of my career and a lot of the previous generation too. It's writing programs are where people coalesce. To Hopkins writing seminars, when John Barth was the main teacher in the MFA program, there was the kind of school of John Barth there that by the time I got there was beginning to dissipate because he was teaching less. And then there are writers like Jeff Becker and Jeannie Vanasco who have a kind of community at Towson University as Goucher, where I taught. But academia is really, fostering a lot of this stuff. I wanted to read something from Scott Fitzgerald. I belong here where everything is civilized and gay and rotted and polite. And that phrase, which is not very complimentary, is often quoted out of context. The longer passage is, Baltimore is warm but pleasant. I love it more than I thought. It is so rich with memories. It is nice to look up the street and see the statue of my great uncle, and that's Francis Scott Key, Fitzgerald was fudging the relationship a little bit there. They were not quite so closely related. And to know that Poe is buried here and that many ancestors of mine have walked in the old town by the bay. I belong here where everything is civilized and gay and rotted and polite. And I wouldn't mind a bit if in a few years Zelda and I could snuggle up together under a stone in some graveyard here. That is a really happy thought and not melancholy at all. Well, instead of snuggling up, they had an amazingly violent divorce, and he didn't die in Baltimore after all. But I think a lot of the appeal of the place that the place still has for writers is lurking in that funny little passage, that a certain resonance for me is when I first moved here in the early 80s, I was moving from New York when New York was like pretty consistently unsafe place everywhere. I mean, some places were more dangerous than others, but you could get mugged or murdered, anywhere in New York City. And so I was always at this kind of high alert level, whenever I went out of my house. And like Baltimore was just like totally not like that. And it was a place where I could let my guard down. That was really quite pleasant. And also in Baltimore, for the first time, I was able to have a room to write in. So those were two very cool things.
If visitors wish to explore literary Baltimore, say, where would you recommend they go?
I think out of Ann Tyler's work, you could probably put together a Ulysses-type tour. I mean, that's an industry in Dublin. And Ann is the person I can think of who has really, really used the Baltimore setting. I don't want to say exhaustive because I don't think she's exhausted it. Somebody else could come along and do the same thing. Or use the setting in the way that she does. But certainly her novels turn around this very strong knowledge of different neighborhoods and different communities here and there, and the sort of curious checkerboard quality of Baltimore neighborhoods that interests everybody who comes here and puzzles people too.
The city has undergone alterations over the decades, some economic, sociological, artistic, yet Baltimore seems to have retained an authenticity. Do you think this authenticity is part of what makes the city so appealing to artists?
I mean, the culture here was created by a lot of different immigrant communities, Black people from the South. I mean, we kind of like to, except when we're talking about Harriet Tubman, we kind of like to not mention the fact that Maryland was a slave state. And the only reason it didn't join the Confederacy is because Lincoln kidnapped the legislature, which he pretty much had to do. But yes, there are a lot of the Black community here has been here since before the Civil War, and then I think probably more came in the Great Migration. You have the Eastern European immigration and the Hollandtown and places like that. There's a big Hispanic community, which I think is healthy. And then in the previous century, there's West Virginians came from and settled in Hamden and to work in the thread mills and make sails for the clipper ships. And this was the 19th century. And that created the Hamden neighborhood, which was held up for a long time. It's like the blue collar urban white neighborhood. Anywhere it's now being gentrified. Hamden edges up on the Hopkins campus, and I lived for a while on the edge of Hamden, technically in Remington, in a little row house like that. And so I would go all over Hamden and drink at all those nice little bars and that kind of stuff. And that was before the sort of Hun commodification of the whole deal, before the avenue became serious self-conscious tourist attraction, which isn't all bad. And so that to me is a very interesting community. And they were drivers of Baltimore as an international city because the clipper ships were what made Baltimore an international city, what they just changed the nature of trade.
Which Baltimore writers would you say from the current or next generation should we be reading?
There are a lot of interesting younger people here. Think of Kate Wire, Sarah Pinsker, Jeannie Vanasco. I'm going to leave out a whole bunch of people, I'm sure. Jane DeLury, who teaches in the City College program. I really admire her work. And another thing that's going on that in terms of kind of community building and is the Be More Art Consortium, which has a publication, has a magazine and an event series, and collaborated with Ed Berlin to make this book called City of Artists. So that was a very conscious effort to bring different writers and visual artists together in this volume, which is, very well designed, edited, and achieved. And I think going through that book will give you a real sense of who's here. And it's not everybody, but it gives you a nice cross section. And so I think the energy coming out of the Be More people is real positive and, important to what's going on around town now.
Baltimore contains no shortage of tours or sites linked to among the country's most celebrated writers. One can walk neighborhoods like historic Mount Vernon and discover buildings occupied or frequented by the likes of Upton Sinclair, Emily Post, John Murphy, John Dos Passos, and Tupac Shakur. The area's Belvedere Hotel, converted to condominiums, once hosted luminaries like Henry James and the aforementioned F. Scott Fitzgerald, who took up residence on Park Avenue and in the Cambridge Arms apartments. You also can pay a visit to a museum that honors one of the city's and the nation's most celebrated journalists, H.L. Mencken. We spoke with Shauntee Daniels, Executive Director of the Baltimore National Heritage Area, who oversees the Mencken House on Holland Street. How would you describe H.L. Mencken today to an audience less familiar with his work?
I am the Executive Director of the Baltimore National Heritage Area, which our primary focus is to promote, engage, and sustain the historic and cultural legacy in Baltimore as a whole. Our offices are located in the H.L. Mencken Museum, which was formerly his home, which he lived in from I think it was 1883 to 1956 when he died. So as the stewards of the house, it has been a challenge to work there, knowing that this man had very strong opinions about race, class, women in general. And when I say race, as a Black woman, it was a little challenging when we decided that we were going to move there. However, after you read him, get to know him, you find that a lot of things he said as a reporter for the Baltimore Sun were right on spot. It was like he was actually the Nostradamus of the 19th century, because he had a vision on individuals. I won't call it a vision, but an instinct on the nature of human behavior, politics, government, social injustice. He had a vision into the future as to what was going to become of us as a society, as a country, democracy that is coming to fruition right now. So I think people are going to start checking in on H.L. Mencken. He is going to become a more prolific person in the 21st century than he was ever in the latter part of the 20th. This is one thing he said, and you'll see where it's going. He said, for complex problems, there is an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong. And democracy is a theory that the common people know what they want and deserve to get it good and hard.
As a social and political critic, Mencken's voice was sardonic and satirical and incisive. Do you think Baltimore's writers have adopted and reflect that style?
I think that the current writers have adopted his style, but not with the same caustic input. Baltimore uniquely is a place where you can be in touch with so many elements of the human condition just by the structure of the politics, the leaders that have been here. So it was a great place for authors to come or live, and they could see how Baltimore is set up because of a number of different issues, the segregation, the redlining. So many things are just right here. So you can get a full breath if you're a writer to talk about so many things in Baltimore. And it's close, it's condensed. You don't have to go far away to see so many different kinds of human conditions. So I think that that's what has driven a lot of our authors to be able to write about social justice, about the injustices, about democracy, about poverty, even about elitism. And so I think that that's what makes Baltimore a great place for a number of writers to break their chops and make a statement.
Among the authors who have spent time in Baltimore, even briefly, few have generated the impact of a single figure, Frederick Douglass. How can a visitor best glimpse the imprint that Douglass left on the city? Would it be to walk in his footsteps on the Frederick Douglass Path to Freedom walking tour offered by Baltimore Black Heritage Tours?
That's just one way. I mean, interpretation is challenging in a lot of ways because people have different ways of showing Frederick Douglass's life. Frederick Douglass was not born here, but he lived here and he was brought here. And so he escaped from here. So his legacy in Baltimore is for that time period that he was brought here to be a child companion for Stephen Auld's young son. And this also, it is really important to talk about, Frederick Douglass was strong on learning to read because he knew that knowledge would free the enslaved or the indentured. Education so that is one of the things that you learn about Frederick Douglass is that his entire legacy is about education, bringing oneself up. People are responsible for other people and that we have to bring each other up. One of his quotes that I have been very fond of, which is what comes out of the tour, is that he comes back here as an adult and he looks around and he goes to the places that he remembers as a child. He bought a set of 3 row houses. And he says, now I own property where I once was property. That statement in itself tells you what Frederick Douglass's intention was. It was to always to elevate himself and those around him to a higher standard. I love another one of his quotes, which is a part of his tour. It's better to build strong children than to repair broken men. And that is something that is prominent in Baltimore right now today, is that we have to work on our young people and educate them in the same frame that you look at Frederick Douglass, is that you have to rise above your situation in order to get out and to be free. So those are the things that I think that you will find when you do the walking tour. I want to bring another person that predates Frederick Douglass. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. She was born in Baltimore. She was one of the first Black American women to be published. I mean, she was the first Black American to be published. And she was very similar to Frederick Douglass. She was an abolitionist. She was involved in the suffrage movement. She was born free, but so many people during her time were still enslaved. She should be raised to the same standard as Frederick Douglass.
What other tours and sites might someone wishing to immerse oneself in literary Baltimore explore?
Well, the Heritage Area has been doing walking tours since its inception in 2004. And in 2009, we did a whole set of tours. And one was Heritage Walk, and the other one was Mount Vernon Cultural Walk. That particular tour is the one being Baltimore National Heritage Area. That's one of the tours that will give you a full breadth of the authors that are here. Upton St. Clair, Gertrude Stein, Tupac Shakur. We don't have a location for our dear friend Ta-Nehisi Coates or Laura Lippman, but the tour that we do is we have John Murphy, who was the founder, publisher, and editor of the Afro newspaper, which was a prolific newspaper of the time that spoke to Black people and the conditions of Black people and social injustice or social commentary. John Dos Passos, he is on our Mount Vernon literary walk tour. More of his literature is at the Peabody, which is a magnificent library. Emily Post is also on that tour. So there is a long list of authors that wrote in Baltimore, are from Baltimore. And like I said, Baltimore is a place that is very compact. Even though we have these multiple layers of have and have nots, you could get a full breadth of society right here in Baltimore. So no matter what you were writing about, you could get all of the information. You could get all of the core of what you want to express.
Beyond history, Baltimore has fostered a vibrant creative community in the present day. Do you see the city's current authors benefiting from and thereby honoring the legacies of their predecessors?
Absolutely. Absolutely. A good author takes note of what other people have written about Baltimore, about society, about the world. I'll use one who writes fiction, and that's Laura Lippman. A lot of her best work is based upon just being here in Baltimore and absorbing the space. We have to pay attention to our writers, whether they're from Baltimore or any other place on the earth. They're always teasing out the human condition and society's problems. And 30, 40, 100 years later, we will read that again. So it is important that we have great writers. Baltimore will produce some phenomenal authors because, like I said, this place gives you so much fodder to tease out and put on pages, whether it's nonfiction or fiction. And so it's important to study these people that lived here. What were they writing about? What were they seeing? And how do we look at that today? Come to Baltimore and walk in the footsteps, visit the places. Maybe they will be inspired to write their own vision.
While preserving its history, Baltimore also nurtures the next generation of writers who travel to the city to improve their craft. Baltimore boasts several notable creative writing programs, with the University of Baltimore, the Maryland Institute College of Art, the Johns Hopkins Writing Seminars, and Goucher College, among others. Author Marion Winik, who also writes a monthly column for Baltimore Fishbowl, has taught in the University of Baltimore's creative writing program since 2007. What would you say draws so many aspiring writers to Baltimore?
I'm pretty sure it's the educational infrastructure that we have here. There's so many colleges and universities, and many of them have creative writing programs, both undergrad and grad. Practically, I mean, I came here because originally to teach at MICA in 2000, and in 2007, I moved over to the University of Baltimore, and I've been teaching there ever since. I moved here in 2009 because I had been commuting from Pennsylvania. And most everyone I teach with at the University of Baltimore came out of the Hopkins writing seminars, which is a big draw and gets a lot of people here. But there's Goucher and us and others. So that's probably what gets people here. And then, they find out what a lovely city it is, and they stay.
What does the city give a writer, both one starting out and to an established author like yourself, by way of, say, support and inspiration?
Well, the reason that I ended up being so settled here quickly and happy here really comes down to an event in a literary reading series. And there's a really wide, great number of reading series here in the city. But this was back when there was one in Hamden called the 510. And it was at an art gallery, Consulis Art Gallery. And it was almost everyone I'm friends with now, I met at this 510 reading series in the late, I guess in 2009 or 10 or something. They don't have that series anymore, but it was, it's a small enough town that, events get and people love to go to these readings. And so maybe there's no more 510, but there's the Ivy and Bird in Hand and the Pratt, and there's a thing at Fadensonen, and they just seem to naturally proliferate and are attended by a vibrant literary community. And I think that there's the Baltimore Book Festival and things like that keep the events that bring people together and help them network for professional and personal benefit. I think that there's also the Maryland State Arts Grants, which many people have gotten. I've gotten one or two. And there's the Baker Big Giant Fellowship, and it's a lot. I do feel that, like everything in Baltimore, this whole thing is not seeped in hierarchy and pretentiousness as it is in some other places. It's easy to feel like if you live in New York or somewhere that you'll just never be part of the scene, and there's some kind of velvet rope or guest list that your name is never going to get on, and even if you do things, you feel like you're maybe on the outskirts permanently. But in Baltimore, it's not like that. It's very easy to go straight to the heart of things, I think, and just it's accessible, and that really benefits new people coming to town and benefited me.
Does Baltimore provide a natural kinship between new and established authors?
Well, one thing is all these MFA programs, which means that there's forming bonds between aspiring and already set up writers. And I have, over the 25 years that I've been teaching writing in Baltimore, I've kept a lot of relationships with my students. And it's so, it's almost like the whole Baltimore literary world is filled with graduates of our program. So it's quite fun to see everywhere I go, to see all these alums, and we all remain connected. And, AWP, which is the national annual meeting of writers and writing programs, is in Baltimore this coming March. So like the entire United States literary world is coming to Baltimore in March. And that's going to be very exciting for the locals.
Shifting to your personal relationship with the city, you write, "To know Baltimore is to love it, but to love it, you really do have to know it. And Baltimore is not the kind of place that's jumping up and down saying, 'Know me, love me.' Baltimore's most lovable aspects are hidden behind veils, magnifying its flaws, keeping its virtues a mystery to outsiders." So you had mentioned that you had relocated a number of years ago, like several writers before you, and you have remained. So what are some of the lovable aspects that have kept you here?
Well, I think the accessibility that I mentioned earlier, I have a column in a local internet magazine called the Baltimore Fishbowl that I've had since 2011, so 15 years. Getting that column was about as easy as writing one email or something, and it's I work with the publisher and Susie Dunn, who has given me so much freedom to, write what I want to write in the way I want to write it for 15 years. It's been a real gift. And then also, when I first moved to this, even when I first moved to Pennsylvania, I used to commute to the city to record commentaries for All Things Considered at what was then UJHU and turned into WYPR. And they gradually stopped having these kind of commentaries on All Things Considered. So I no longer did that, but I pitched a book. I started turning to book reviewing more and more in the early 2000s. And I pitched a weekly book review podcast to WYPR. It's a broadcast and a podcast. And so I've had that since 2017, and it's called The Weekly Reader. I frequently do in-conversation events at the bookstores. Now that I have such a national profile as a book reviewer, I asked to do conversations with a lot of, big deal writers. So yeah, it's been really fun to have the resources of this city so available to me as I extend my literary citizenship, because most of these things I do are low paid or no paid. It's all a big labor of love.
How has living in the city all these years influenced your own writing?
Yeah, I haven't written that much about Baltimore per se, though I have that book, The Baltimore Book of the Dead, which is a collection of portraits of people they're not all from Baltimore. It's because I wrote it in Baltimore, but it does have characters. It's from Baltimore, but that's my most Baltimore-y work so far, probably. But I was thinking just yesterday how I bet I will want to write things about Baltimore after I leave, because I think sometimes when you just have to be, I've never felt like a Baltimorean. I mean, I think it's a very special thing to be a Baltimorean, and where did you go to high school, and the people you can't really become one. You either are born, you're one, or you moved here, and that's me. And I'm definitely a New Jerseyite. I left there when I was 17, but I would never not consider myself to be from New Jersey. And but I feel like after I leave, I'm going to be filled with all kinds of thoughts about this place.
The celebration of books is very much woven into the fabric of Baltimore's calendar, especially through festivals. The city hosts the Baltimore Book Festival in the fall, while the spring welcomes the City Lit Festival. One cannot overlook another annual celebration of perhaps Baltimore's most popular writer, the Edgar Allan Poe Festival and Awards in October. We spoke with Enrica Jane, Executive Director of Poe Baltimore and the Edgar Allan Poe House and Museum. What does an attendee at the Poe Festival experience?
Oh, wow. Well, we hope that you're experiencing a lot of camaraderie with a bunch of people who are rabid about Edgar Allan Poe. Poe Fest is a community event in West Baltimore. We hold it every year in the shadow of the Edgar Allan Poe House and Museum in Baltimore. And the festival itself, the guts of the event, a free event. We have a stage, vendors, food, music, just about anything you can think of devoted to Edgar Allan Poe. Usually at the very beginning of October, the weekend closest to Poe's death date. So you win trivia if you remember. Poe dies October 7th, 1849. So we're really kicking off the spooky season, the Halloween season. As soon as October 1 hits, everybody is all about Halloween. So it's a really fun way to be at the front of the season and get people excited. Just like a Poe House is a small museum that tries to be great big, the festival started out as a small event that is like bursting at the seams and grows great big. We really do. Poe Takes Baltimore. We take people bus tours around the city, ticketed events like the Black Cat ball, usually an exhibit over at Westminster Hall, not very far from Poe House, where Edgar Allan Poe is in fact buried. We even have a death exhibit at Carroll Mansion across town. So just a lot of fun, just activities over several days in Baltimore. And all of our programs, I like to tell people this, all of our programs are put together by Poe fans. So if Poe people come and they enjoy these events, it's because they've been put together by just people who are just as devoted to the author. And I probably just Halloween in general, October in general.
Beyond the festival, Baltimore offers several outlets for immersion in Poe's legacy, from the room that bears his name at the Enoch Pratt Free Library to his grave, which you mentioned. Could you walk us through some of these offerings?
Well, Baltimore's a really great city for embracing this author. I do challenge people to find another American city that embraces an author in the same way. You do have, Sleepy Hollow. They love Washington Irving, or you have Key West. They love Hemingway because of the six-toed cats in Hemingway's house. So you do see that, but I think that Baltimore really has shown that devotion to Poe. So the very fact that our, professional football team, our team, the only team in the NFL named for a poem, that's in itself, like on its face, just evidence of how much the city loves Poe. You see murals, you see all these different locations, and Poe did live in a number of different places in the city. So just like there are pieces of Poe all over the country, in a way, there are, echoes and whispers of Poe, his last days, his final footsteps, different places. A lot of controversy around his death, the fact that his death is still a mystery. So you've got a lot of people who just come and are trying to solve that mystery just by being on the same streets, trying to pull it out of the stones, I guess. Poe's grave, of course, we do have the body. So this is a place to come to see the man himself. You mentioned the library. There are several businesses that understand just intrinsically that Poe is good business. So one of our concert halls is about to be rechristened Nevermore Hall. A lot of restaurants, Telltale Cafe, my favorite restaurant, Annabelle Lee Tavern, devoted to Poe. So it's just a lot of fun. And of course, the Edgar Allan Poe House and Museum. We are special for a number of reasons. Famous because Poe lived here, the only surviving home in the city of Baltimore where Edgar Allan Poe and his family were known to have lived. But also, this is the home where Poe makes his chosen family. He's raised by a foster family, the Allan family in Richmond, Virginia. That's how we get the name Edgar Allan Poe. But Poe's blood relations are from Baltimore. His father's family from Baltimore. His grandparents actually served in the Revolution, as well as the War of 1812, known to George Washington and the Marquis de Lafayette. So it's incredible Revolutionary War connection ahead of America 250 next year. We're having a lot of fun sharing the Poe family history here. And then this is the home where Poe begins his professional writing career. He had written poetry. He considered himself a poet, written poetry prior to his time at Amity Street, but coming to Baltimore, this is the city where he begins to pen short stories, submit short stories to the burgeoning magazine industry of the day. And while he's living in Amity Street, one of his stories wins first prize from the Baltimore Saturday Visitor periodical that had a writing contest. And the cachet of that first place prize gets him noticed by the literary community. And this is the first time Poe was paid professionally, paid money for his work. Important part of being a pro, if you want to, you get paid. So, it's just a really important part of Poe's biography, and we're really proud that Poe House can very proudly say this is the house where Poe begins his career, and Baltimore gets to say that we discovered Edgar Allan Poe.
Is there anything that has surprised you when exploring his relationship to Baltimore?
Well, I think I've been very fortunate to be with the organization going on. It'll be 9 years next year, and I'm always surprised by the power of just Poe. It's a pop culture figure, this icon. I think the experience of reading Poe, a lot like Shakespeare, it's very personal for a lot of folks. There's the scary stuff, but then there's also the gothic and scary and macabre, fun kind of gothic idea of Poe, but there's also quite a bit of, catharsis, very primal emotions that he's writing about: fear, love, hatred, these kinds of things, getting it all out on the page. And so people's personal experiences with Poe, especially Americans, he's assigned to, like every English teacher, most English teachers in the United States assigning Poe to young people, trying to keep them awake in class. And you get Poe when you are, a teenager, or a time in your life where those emotions are very raw and new. And so your experience of Poe can be very, personal, especially at that time. And then if you come back to Poe as an adult, it is really kind of profound how many different layers are there, especially Poe's talks about grief and the different intense love, mourning, these kinds of emotions that you have to go a little bit longer in life before you really start to understand and get that perspective to look back on these things, whereas everything else is so fresh and new. So it's a very long way to say, but the power of Poe continues to amaze me sometimes, just how moving he is for people, how personal he is for people. And it's part of a lot of childhoods and teens and coming up and those kinds of experiences. Baltimore, though, I love just how much you see vestiges of him all over the city as a city icon, in a way. As I don't want to say patron saint, because he's almost liked for opposite of saintly things. That's kind of the cool part of it. There's a grittiness to the city, and a kind of scrappiness to it. And I think that it's one of the reasons why the city really embraces Poe as a figure in a lot of ways too. So I love that. As a recovering English major myself, it's always fun to be close to those things. And then it's great to live in a city that embraces this author.
What else would you like a visitor to know about Poe in Baltimore?
I would love for people to know that as we are getting into America 250, as we are talking about the story that we're continuing to tell, Poe's grandparents' service made their famous grandson's service possible and changed the world, changed literature forever around the world. There is no medium or genre that Poe has not been adapted in some way. And so it's kind of amazing to trace that, how their service led to his career. And then, of course, we know that history and how it changed things. So it's really fun to share with people what we have planned to reveal more of that, especially for America 250. And then Poe House is a very small house museum. It has a fascinating history in that we are literally at the very corner of one of the oldest housing projects in the city of Baltimore. They're called the Edgar Allan Poe homes. They were the first of 5 housing projects built for Black families in a time of segregation. And the Poe homes are being redeveloped. Now, they will stay public housing, but they're being rebuilt all around us. Now, the Edgar Allan Poe House, historical house, was cut in half when the housing project was first built, and the housing project built onto us. So we've been neighbors now for over 80 years. And because we're a National Historic Landmark, nobody's supposed to chop anything off of Poe House anymore. So we have a once-in-a-generation opportunity for expansion and for the museum to grow. So people come to Baltimore kind of expecting that they're going to get to see Poe's house, like the House of Usher, this big spooky mansion that they're going to get to visit. And instead they find a very tiny, humble row home where Poe lived with his grandmother and his aunt and his cousin, who would become his wife. And that in itself is a touchstone that's very, very important. But we have an opportunity and a chance to grow the museum, restore the footprint, and then set back for new construction to really give the city the Poe Museum it deserves.
While Baltimore has cradled those who write, the city also caters to those who read, with an outstanding collection of bookstores, any of which deserves a visit. Emma Snyder owns the Ivy Bookshop. Does serving the population of a place known as the city that reads make this job more challenging or more fulfilling?
Personally, love that question. I definitely would say for me, it makes it more fulfilling. And no small part of that is because I was born and raised in Baltimore, and so grew up during the era when that designation was given, that the mayor declared us the city that reads, and it was emblazoned on all the park benches. And that's just a really deeply embedded sense of my understanding of the city around me and its values and priorities, I think. As a kid who was an avid reader and loved going to the library and sort of had this collective sense that Baltimore valued reading. And I think it's just sort of a wonderful thing to be able to point to, a wonderful designation to have as a part of our collective history. And I think that it speaks in some sense now. Of course, it isn't our city motto any longer, but it was such a wonderful one that it's hard not to kind of call back to it. And I think now, it does speak to something that I feel is there in our literary community, which is sort of a deep sense of pride, attachment, vitality, and also just connection one to another.
If you were curating a handful of books that capture the essence of Baltimore as a literary destination, which would you choose?
Well, one of the things I think that is true of Baltimore is it is just a place with sort of wide-ranging curiosities, ways of expressing itself, realities. And so it's a hard question in a sense, because, nothing will capture the essence of a city. That I sometimes think the best quality is that I'm just always surprised by what is going on, by what people are doing, by sort of the creative spirit that pervades Baltimore. But certainly a couple of actually pretty recent books speak to that for me. One is a recent essay collection by a guy named Lawrence Burney, who is a journalist who grew up here, became very involved, especially in sort of the music world in Baltimore, and started writing for various local papers, and now writes or is connected to the Baltimore Banner. And he's just a really wonderful cultural critic with sort of a wonderful voice and an incredible kind of curiosity about the artistic process, but also as sort of a personal process. And so I think that essay collection, which came out this summer, just really, for me, helps kind of set the stage and scene for both Baltimore as this kind of very particular place, but also Baltimore as a city that is connected to this much larger, incredibly vibrant, vital world of creativity and ideas. A couple of other books that are very different that come to mind are a novel that just came out 2 weeks ago by a guy named Matt Norman that's a holiday rom-com. But one of the things I realized as we were hosting Matt's launch is he has quietly written a whole series of really wonderful, fun novels that are set in Baltimore, and it's a portrait of certain places. And so this one is about a woman who owns a restaurant in Fells Point and a guy who works at an office, down in South Baltimore. As he was asked at the launch, are there connections between your novels? I realized, and he said, yeah, they're sort of characters who weave throughout. And so if you start reading his books, you'll actually see these little Easter eggs. And so I think he has quietly actually been creating this whole universe of novels that paint a portrait of a particular version of Baltimore. There's a book that came out a couple of years ago now that I can't resist suggesting, that's by Susan Mwadi Daraj, called Behind You is the Sea, that's also interconnected set of short stories about the Palestinian American community in Baltimore. And I think that, yet again, sort of just goes into a very particular community, the immigrant experience. And one of the things I loved about it that interconnected sets of short stories allow you to do is, again, it in concise form kind of allows you these windows into a host of different corners of the city, and you get vantages on different pieces of what it means to live in Baltimore. And then the final book I think I would give a shout out to that also came out very recently and I just love is a biography of Claire McCardle by the wonderful writer Elizabeth Evans Dickinson. This one's the one that seems least Baltimore, kind of on its surface, though Claire McCardle, who is this kind of seminal mid-century designer, a fashion designer, did grow up in Frederick, and has connections to Baltimore. But Elizabeth is a really wonderful former journalist and nonfiction writer who did a deep dive into the life of this lesser known, incredibly creative, incredibly influential female designer of the mid-century who sort of changed the way that we dress and sort of affected us in this deep way. And so few people know about her. And the reason that I bring it up is I think it exemplifies what I think is just sort of fundamentally true about Baltimore, which is it's just a place of sort of authentic energy and curiosity. And I feel like that exemplifies the spirit of this place. And it's the spirit that's shot through the book. And I think a Baltimore is a city that like is itself. And I think it is not therefore accidental that Elizabeth is this wonderful writer living in Baltimore.
How would you like a visitor to experience the Ivy? At an event or quietly happening upon the store and wandering the aisles?
I would love a visitor to experience the Ivy in a host of ways. And I guess, so as a little context, the Ivy is we converted a old 19th century building into an old 19th century house into this active bookstore that I describe often as a social space anchored by books. And then it sits on a 3-acre garden that's quite beautiful. And at this point has multiple art installations out in the gardens, as well as beehives out back and berry patches that are being tended by a wonderful local novelist. So there's a lot to experience on the property itself. And I think that my ideal way maybe of coming to the Ivy would be to walk in the doors. And as people often are, you walk into what was an old mill house, but the previous owners of it was a meditation community church. And so they built out a sanctuary on the back of the first level. And so you walk into what feels like a little old house, and then you sort of step through and it opens up and there's kind of a peaked roof and it has this big open airy feel. And you walk into the space and to kind of very quietly browse on your own and just soak in the sense of airy, calm, populated by all these wonderful books that is there, and have the experience in the store, and then walk outside on the way, maybe to your car in the parking lot out back, and walk past an event happening. So our events happen primarily on a big covered patio out back under that sanctuary space. And so often I'll see that happening in the evening. Someone will have come in to get a particular book or to have browsed and then walk back and notice what's going on and stop and listen to some poetry for a little while. And then look out and notice that there's like some delightfully cute bit of wildlife like hopping by. And so then maybe pursue an adorable rabbit like into the gardens and wander around and find yourself at like the concrete poetry installation where you can interact with these letters and create poetry in the gardens, or just sort of sit and read a little bit at a picnic table. And I think that is sort of my ideal way for anybody to interact with the store.
Do you have a preference between hosting an established writer who brings gravitas or hosting a brand new author and helping introduce that person to the world?
Brand new author, pretty much every time. Not that I don't love hosting authors with gravitas, which we do and which I absolutely adore. And I will say there's something totally intoxicating about any time we can gather groups of 100, 200, occasionally 1,000 people for a book event, and just seeing the energy and vitality, but just the spirit in the space that among things, especially in a moment in history that feels so fractured, where it can be so easy to feel alone, and it can be so easy, I mean, for so many political reasons, but also with the rise of AI, to wonder about kind of how are we holding fast to what it means to be human? When you're in a room of 1,000 people who are just like electric in anticipation of a book, or listening to really thoughtful people talk about their material, that has certainly its own incredible appeal. And this is a thing I think that indie bookstores are so well positioned to do, and is really kind of at the heart of why it matters that we exist, which is we get to read so much. And when we fall in love with a new book, a debut writer, someone who has not yet been introduced to the audience for whom their book would mean something significant and real, that we can host that person, and that we can try and advocate on their behalf, that we can put it into people's hands, and that we can see those people connect with that work. It just feels like a really useful thing to do in the world, and a really meaningful thing to do. And so I think always sort of that act of really loving a work and getting to kind of advocate effectively on its behalf, but also when you can merge that with actually being there with the person, especially at the outset of, a book's life or their career, and feel like you're getting to, watch them step into whatever that like next phase of that artistic process and creative life is. That's just like one of the best feelings.
Of the titles on the shelves of the Ivy and its peers, you likely will find the works of D. Watkins, the modern writer who might best capture the breadth and nuance of the place he calls home. So many writers have called Baltimore home over the decades. As an author identified so closely with the city, do you feel a connection to your predecessors? If so, any in particular?
I mean, my favorites, and the ones that have had a great influence on me has been David Simon. Even though he's like a DC guy, he's a Baltimore guy. He's been in Baltimore for like 40 some years. He's he's ours. We're going to claim David. So David for sure. Ta-Nehisi and Will Hilton is a journalist. Will Hilton's a brilliant journalist. Brett McCabe, a lot of people don't know, is a brilliant journalist. Frederick Douglass, for sure. The narrative of Frederick Douglass is like one of the only books I read as a child. So it definitely spoke to me. I consume so much information, and I'm inspired by everything from art to visual art to music to sound to people who sit on a corner and tell stories, which is probably my biggest influence, is just sitting around people on my block and listening to them tell stories. That it's hard for me to say that I pulled from a certain artist, another author, or another writer. Marion Winik has been one of my biggest influences, and she's brilliant. Like, she can, the way her brain works, she can crank out perfect essays. She can crank out a perfect essay, I feel like, in 10 minutes. You know what I'm saying? She can read a novel in 11 minutes. So it's like, I'm inspired by all of that. But again, like, is that the Baltimore in her, or is that the genius in her? And I think I'm more moved by the craft and the work, even though I got so much love for every writer. For anybody who's written anything from here, we not the easiest to come out this city as a writer. So I got so much love for them.
The opening chapter of The Cook-Up concludes with the line, "I saw it all." So having grown up in Baltimore and having built your career in the city, how has seeing it all shaped you as a writer and as a person?
What's funny about that line is I was wrong. I did not see it all. At the time when I wrote that, I thought I saw it all. I didn't see a fraction of what I will go on to see. I do feel like my career and how I ended up in this position is not traditional and it's not normal. So to say I saw it all was more or less a nod to where I came from. And that's any and everything around danger and violence and poverty and pain. And, I felt like, all right, I got a hold of it. And even on that side of it, there was things that I didn't see. It is funny because, I think about my grandma and how she used to always say, just live a little longer. And I can't remember how old I was when I wrote that book. I'm probably in my early 30s. And now I'm sitting here, 45 years old, and my whole belief system, my moral code, and so many different things that I subscribed to at that time, they've evolved. Like, they're different. Some things are the same, but a lot of things are different.
Also in The Cook-Up, going back to that, so you have made a point to engage with young people, and you've said you want to serve as the example and resource you did not have as an aspiring artist. And you opened the third chapter of The Cook-Up with the question, did you ever idolize a person you could touch? And when you wrote that line, did you have in mind the way you wish to show up in your community?
I think it's always been a part of the mission. And it's like, when you asked about like my connection to other writers, I think about some of the writers from Baltimore that I really wanted to meet that I never got to meet. And I think about some of those relationships that I wish I had that I never really was able to get. And I think about, I always thought about being the person I needed a lot. Like, I spent a lot of time thinking about being the person I needed. And I feel like I never had an opportunity to be the guy who does these big things and then go back because I never left. I don't know if it's helpful in a way. A lot of students are inspired because they see my life as something that I don't really see my life. I don't see it as glamorous as they see it, but they see it as glamorous. So it's helpful. But then sometimes I wonder if it's not as helpful because I don't have the fresh eyes of a person who's become far removed and able to bring back some knowledge that I needed to go to the other side of the world to acquire. But I just try my best to be honest. I try my best to talk to them about the things I wish I knew when I was their age. I try my best to be as accessible and as fun. I wrote this book, Where Tomorrow's Not Promised, and it's Carmelo Anthony's memoir. And I wrote it, and because I wrote the book and I worked on that, me and Carmelo worked together closely on that book. CEO of the Pratt Library wanted to make his mark on the city, and he wanted to do this Carmelo Anthony exhibition. And I told him I thought it would be a great idea. And then he asked me, could I curate it? Could I do it? And it's, it's not necessarily in my wheelhouse, but I was like, I'll give it a shot. So I get the event together. I fundraise. I hired a production company. But for me to put my spin on it, I'm like, yo, we're not just doing this this celebration, this exhibition. We're going to do a year's worth of programming with people that work around Carmelo so that, people who are inspired by basketball and sports or being a public figure can see that there's more than one way to make it. And we're going to offer the skills for you to be able to come in and get, free lessons on how to be an NBA stylist, how to be an NBA creative director, how to agent your agent. My workshop is going to be on ghostwriting because I've written books for other athletes. So all of these things around the sport, we're going to offer to the community for free. And I was very proud of that. And I was very proud that we got to the opening. And I was very proud that our exhibit went up. And I was very proud that, this all came together. So in the midway through this, there's a board member on the library who tells the new CEO, he says, you're letting Watkins, as in D. Watkins, curate an exhibit at our main space? And he said, yes, man, D. Watkins is great. People like him a lot. He seems to be a pretty solid guy. Carmelo Anthony? He said, yes, Carmelo's going to the Hall of Fame. The guy says, Watkins and Anthony are two common street thugs. They don't deserve anything. You are not fit for this role. They will fail. And I'm like, well, I can still fail. This room, I don't think Melo can. I didn't get upset when I was able to get the governor and the mayor to come out and speak at the opening and the ribbon cutting. And I didn't use it as an opportunity to get on a soapbox and talk about adversaries because it wasn't about me. It wasn't about my ego. It was about hundreds of children on a Saturday morning, 10 o'clock in the morning, fighting to get inside of a library. That's what it's about. I'll tell them the truth. Like, yo, if you're looking at it like, yo, this exhibit is big. We got, it was covered in like 400 markets. Like, we got a whole lot of press on it. People was talking about it. It's a big thing. I got a chance to spearhead it. I'm at the top of the food chain on this. It's my vision. It's based on the book that I wrote on him. We bring it to life. It looks great. But the inside is a person this close who makes decisions. And, and here I am. I got some awards and I went to Hopkins and all this stuff. And I had a troubled start, but I turned it around and, I became a good guy. But to him, I'm still a common street thug and it's nothing I can do about it. So do I give him my energy and trying to prove him wrong? Or do I just be the best person I can be and try to help who I can help? And that's like the truth. And that's what I would tell them when I'm in them spaces.
A feature cited by artists and observers regarding Baltimore is the city's authenticity. They're drawn by the authenticity. It drives them. It stirs their creativity. Do you think a tension exists between retaining this authenticity, but also moving forward as a community?
So one thing that I think, and this is just how I was raised and where I come from, is that you show up as yourself. I'm not the same guy I was when I wrote the Cook-Up. I'm just not. And I don't even have the connections or the relationships, or I'm not on the same blocks, or those blocks don't even exist anymore. So I don't even have it in me to even write that book at this time in my life. But it's my job in trying to empower and uplift the next person who still has proximity to those blocks and those projects to tell that story. And that's authentic to me. Yes, I go back to my neighborhood. I'm in my neighborhood all the time and I'm around and I'm a fixture, but I'm not in there under the same capacity. So they don't look at me as D. Watkins on this block or this corner. They look at me as the college professor and the old head and Unc, the old guy, the dinosaur is what they look at me as. I'm like a house phone to them. And that's how they look at me, so I embrace that. And I don't have to, I don't have to fake, like, I don't have to tell you I was this and that back in the day. I don't have to do that. All I have to do is be like, yo, Shorty, this is what I'm into. If you care, you might not even care. This is what I'm into. These are some things that are cool. This is where I teach at. You should come to campus, come check a class out. Like and that's me authentically showing up as myself. And I think a lot of times, and we all do it, like it's not even an artist thing. It's like a people thing. Like we get nostalgia in how we were viewed and treated, back in the day, and we get older and we lose that.
Artistically, do you find Baltimore can expand and evolve in ways that allow you to further actualize your talents as a writer?
I think it has been. I think there's been times where the go-to person in Baltimore was Ta-Nehisi. There's been times where I was the go-to person in Baltimore. There's been times where Westmore swooped back in after the other Westmore and did 5 days, and he became the perspective that everyone wanted. And I think there's times that all of us were writing about different things at different times in the collective of all of our perspectives, because they're all very different. We all have very different realities, different upbringings, different realities, but we all have different perspectives. So when I started out, I wrote an essay called These Are My Two Baltimores. And everyone kind of took it on as there's two Baltimores. And it wasn't that there's two Baltimores, there are many Baltimores. The title was These Are My Two Baltimores, just for me. Everyone I named, all of these different writers, Marion Winik and Jane DeLaury and, all of these different writers, we all enter the city from a different space, and we have different friend groups, and we get locked into different things. So we all have different Baltimores.
Do you think there's an audience out there that just wants Baltimore to stay Baltimore and not evolve?
I think so. I think there's a growing, super annoying influencer generation. A lot of times they don't have real connection to the city outside of they understand that Baltimore can get you some clickbait. So they infiltrate the city and they try to promote negativity. They try to promote bad things. They try to build narratives that aligns with their social plan, their social media plan to get engagement. And they figured out what people respond to, and they've mastered ways to get people to talk. So I definitely think they exist. We get upset around conversations and dealing with gentrification and things like that. I think one thing that people on every side of that argument fully understands is that one thing a city is going to do is change. There will be new businesses. There will be new politicians. There will be new people in power. There will be new rules. There will be new changes in culture. It's cities and spaces. They always change.
Is there anywhere else you'd rather be?
As of this moment, no, but I can say that because I've had great opportunities in other places and I didn't take them. So I can definitely say that I chose home. And even on the difficult days, I'm just thankful. I'm thankful to be in a group of so many talented artists that are here.
Baltimore, Maryland, a city at the crossroads of America's literary history. A city still making history today. The city that reads, a worthy stop on a lit trip.